立法會主席。
The President of the Legislative Council. Questions. The first question, Mr. Albert HO. Thank you, Mr. President. The head of the Central Policy Unit, CPU for short, has reportedly said in a recent telephone interview that in future the CPU will deploy more resources and manpower to closely attend to messages posted on social networking websites and discussion forums on the Internet. In addition, the CPU has been assigned a new duty of identifying talents for hundreds of advisory bodies and committees. It has also been reported that some administrative officers have recently been informed that all appointments to public officers of important statutory and advisory bodies are required to be reported to a newly appointed full-time member of the CPU. In this connection, will the government inform this council? A. Of the resources and manpower that the CPU will deploy in the next 5 years for monitoring the opinions on public affairs expressed by members of the public on social networking websites and discussion forums on the Internet, whether it will recruit additional manpower to post comments on these social networking websites and discussion forums, if it will of the additional manpower to be recruited. B. Whether various policy bureaus were previously required to report to CPU's members appointments to the public offices of statutory and advisory bodies. Of the total number of candidates for appointment to public offices which have been reported by various policy bureaus since the implementation of the measure, and whether the CPU member concerned has raised objection to any of these candidates. If objections have been raised, whether the candidates concerned have been appointed eventually, and C. Whether it has assessed if CPU's new function concerning appointments to public offices of statutory and advisory bodies will undermine the power of policy bureaus in appointing members of the committee to public offices. If the assessment outcome is in the affirmative, of the details. If the assessment outcome is in the negative, the reasons for that. Chief Secretary for Administration. Mr. President, the principal function of the Central Policy Unit, CPU for short, is to provide advice to top government officials, that is the Chief Executive, the Chief Secretary for Administration, and the Financial Secretary. It is a think tank in nature. Apart from conducting policy research and drafting the CE's annual policy address, the CPU also examines major policy issues in depth, analyzes and assesses community concerns and public opinions, and encourages community discussion on public policy through the appointment of part-time members. In recent years, the CPU has also been tasked with providing secretariat support for the Commission on Strategic Development. My reply to the three-part question is as follows. A. Analyzing and assessing community concerns and public opinions is a major area of work of the CPU. The CPU has been gauging public sentiment through different channels, such as its part-time members, community networks, newspapers and magazines, electronic media, and regular opinion surveys, etc. Online media has become increasingly popular in recent years, in particular among the younger generation. The public no longer express their views just through the traditional media. To keep up with the times, the CPU needs to extend its channels for collecting, assessing, and analyzing public opinions to online media to gain a better grasp of community sentiment and views. The CPU has recently deployed 1 to 2 existing staff members to collect online opinions. They will not post any views or comments on social networking websites or discussion forums. Part B. The administration has not required policy bureaus to report to a member of the CPU before the appointment of members to advisory and statutory bodies. Neither has it empowered or entrusted the CPU to approve, decide on, or veto the appointments of candidates nominated by policy bureaus. The advisory and statutory bodies of the SARG form an integral part of our political system and play an important role in supporting the administration's work. They also provide a key channel for people with aspiration to serve the community. By appointing people from different backgrounds to these advisory and statutory bodies, the administration can enhance its links and mutual understanding with various sectors. It also helps the administration feel the pulse of the community, engage the views of people from different sectors and professions. Policy formulation and implementation can then better reflect the views of the community. The CE has made it clear that the principles governing the appointment of non-official members to advisory and statutory bodies remain unchanged. Appointments will continue to be based on merits. All along, the chairpersons and members of major advisory and statutory bodies have been appointed in accordance with the relevant legislation or administrative procedures. Policy bureaus will continue to be responsible for the appointment procedures for the advisory and statutory bodies under the purview and drop lists of candidates for consideration by the appointing authorities. Over the years, the CPU has appointed hundreds of part-time members, forming a rich pool of talents. From time to time, the CPU has recommended talents to the CE, CS, and FS directly. The current term government considers it necessary to nurture more people who aspire to serve the community and to participate in public policy formulation. The CPU will strengthen its policy research in this area and will provide more systematic advice to the top echelon of the government on candidates suitable for appointment. To this end, the administration has informed policy bureaus that they may consult the CPU when preparing their lists of candidates for appointment to major bodies or committees. Specifically, the CPU will give advice to policy bureaus when the latter are preparing lists of candidates for consideration by the appointing authorities, such as the CE. Such advisory service, being more systematic than before, will avoid the appointment of the same candidate to different bodies when he or she is nominated concurrently by different bureaus. It will also help bring in more talents from different sectors. I must stress that the CPU only gives advice or recommends potential candidates. It is up to the directors of bureaus and the relevant civil servants of the bureaus concerned to decide if the advice of potential candidates should be accepted. Bureaus are still responsible for the appointment procedures and preparation of the final candidate lists. Appointment decisions rest with the appointing authorities. The CPU does not have the authority to approve or veto appointments. Part C. The CPU only plays an advisory role. Since it has no authority to approve or veto appointments, it definitely would not undermine the role and authority of policy bureaus in nominating or appointing members of the committee to advisory and statutory bodies. Mr. Albert HO, Mr. President, the head of the CPU, that is the officer in charge of the CPU, namely Mr. Xiu Xinpo, did say that the CPU is a tool of the government. Since he is taking up the office, 1/3 of the team, that is 6 of them, have been ousted. Some of them did not have their contracts being renewed, or even some who have the contracts still ongoing or contracts renewed have been having their contracts terminated. It has become a factory of LEONG's supporters. Is it because they do not want to become yes men or the government tools of the government, as suggested by Su Sin-po and C.Y. Leung, and so they have to leave office? Will it damage the CPU's role, which plays the function of being objective and independent in assessing public opinions? If not, then why have so many staff members been dismissed? CS. For the CPU to recruit its staff, in particular the non-civil service staff. Well, currently for the CPU, the establishment is that there are 22 posts who are non-civil service positions. When such staff members are recruited to the NCSC positions, the CPU deals with it on its own. For the contract staff, for their recruitment and their departure from office upon expiry of the contract, they are the work pertaining to non-civil service positions. My understanding is that before the 1st of July 2012, that is before Mr. Su Sin-po became the head of the CPU, there were 16 such non-civil service positions. As a result of the needs of work, since the 1st of July, and with the approval of the CSB, 6 more non-NCSC positions have been created, and then 6 or 7 have left or about to left. One has the contract renewed, and then he's the chief researcher, and then another one will have his contract expiring on 1st of January and will leave, and then another one will also be leaving, and then there is one who has the contract expired and has left, and he's an assistant researcher. So as I have said, all such recruitment matters and arrangements of the non-civil service positions are within the ambit of the CPU. As I have said, in relation to appointment of members to advisory bodies and statutory organizations, as well as the appointment of staff members to such government posts, it is based on the merits of the candidates. She hasn't answered my question. How come there's so many staff members have been ousted? CS, I have given you the figures. In fact, what happens is that we have some vacancies, and in fact, we are having a recruitment exercise to view the vacancies. As to whether it is a large number, it depends on your views. Some of them have had their contracts expiring, and then they just leave upon expiry of the contracts. It is not for me to guess why the staff member leaves upon expiry of contract. As far as the recruitment and appointment matters are concerned, the power rests with the head of the CPU, Mr. Ma Fung-kwok. Thank you, Mr. President. I've got 2 questions. Sorry. In supplementary questions, each member may only ask 1 question. If you've got 2 questions, you may queue up again. I just want to look at the post of the new member responsible for helping with the cultivation of a reserve of talents. Why haven't you considered the appointment of a dedicated officer within the C's office to deal with such matters? Because a lot of membership appointment matters rest with the CE. If you haven't considered this view, why? In fact, by having such an arrangement, you can remove the doubts in the mind of the community. CS4A. In relation to Mr. Ma's point, that is the appointment of a full-time member, well, the CPU has already submitted a paper to the panel on public service, and According to this paper, it is said that the CPU will be enhancing its work in a number of areas, one being the cultivation of talents. And therefore, at the House Committee last week, I said that for this particular full-time member, she didn't just have one single task, that is, recommend candidates to the policy bureaus for appointment to statutory and advisory bodies. In fact, as stated in the paper to the PSP, in the future days, she'll be working on the cultivation of a talent bank, and she will be responsible for a number of research tasks, but then she'll also be taking up this additional task of cultivating talents. Mr. Kenneth Leung, question for the CS4A. What about the head of the CPU? Would it simply be the decision of the CE to appoint and remove him, or will the CS4A and the FS have a part to play as well? CS4A, the answer is the CE. Ms. Emily Long, Mr. President, in relation to the website patrolling, according to her answer, it is said that two officers have been deployed. Would it be listening in or monitoring public opinion on the net? We are really worried. Of course, Mr. President, you know what happens on the mainland. It is said that there are over 100,000 internet policemen doing the patrolling work on the net. So I want to get clarification from the government. If the administration is willing to listen to the public through various means and channels, we do welcome it. But then, in relation to this arrangement, now resources have been deployed. I want to know whether they will play the role of internet policemen so as to monitor public opinions. So, CS, please clarify their functions. CS, I don't think Ms. Lau has to worry about it. Hong Kong is a place that treasures freedom, and we've also got freedom of expression. Let me repeat once again. The work of the CPU in this regard simply is to catch up with the times. We have got many new media. If the administration would like to better understand community sentiment and public opinions, we cannot afford to ignore the opinions expressed on the internet. Let me repeat once again. The CPU in doing this is to expand the channels to analyze and assess the views expressed on the internet. The CPU members or CPU staff members will not be making comments on such forums or through such media. What then is their work? You have said that they won't make comments, but how are they going to collect the views, and to what use will the information be put to? I think this answers your questions. CS, have you got anything to add? Yes, allow me to be more specific. I also had a look of the information gathered from the internet after they have been analyzed and assessed. Well, in simple terms, the CPU will collect and analyze the opinions, and then the senior echelon, the policy bureaus, directors of bureaus, and the secretaries of departments will be told about the hot topics. So it is as simple as that. Mr. Alan Leong. Thank you, Mr. President. If the CPU's core business and legitimate business is to provide advice to the top government officials, that is the CECS and the FS, that is acting like a think tank, then what about the cultivation of talents, the establishment of a talent bank? Then this is beside the core business. Through the President, I would like to ask the CS this question. In Part B of the main reply, it is said that to this end, the administration has informed policy bureaus that they may consult the CPU when preparing the lists of candidates for appointment to major bodies or committees. But then Mr. Su Jin-po was not reported to say this. He said that they must consult the CPU. He even named one of the full-time members, that is Mrs. Sophia Ms. Sophia called. So I want to know whether the reply revises what Mr. Xu Xinbo had said to the media in relation to the arrangement. Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. I have noted what the head of the CPU had said on various occasions during the last week. If you ask me to comment on each and every statement he made last week on different occasions, it will be difficult. In fact, he has his own style of making statements and he has his own characteristics. But I am duty-bound to make it clear what the SARG and in particular the senior officials of the SARG have empowered the CPU to do. It hasn't been different from its nature as a think tank. Being a think tank that is giving advice to the top government officials embraces a general scope. Even when it was first set up, there was no fixed remit. In other words, it can move with the times, and then the CPU can play the role of a think tank, and it can give advice, and it may even give alternative advice. The CPU has been given this function, and to cultivate the talents, we need to understand the information about the talents, and therefore one of the full-time members of the CPU has been asked to do the following for the relevant policy bureaus. That is, when they drop the list of candidates, suggestions or recommendations may be made. This is in line with what I have said. Mr. Xu has said that it is a case of must. Now it has been revised to may in the CS reply. So is the CS amending what Mr. Xu has said earlier? She hasn't answered the question directly. Yes, if Mr. Leung has paid attention, well, what happens is that the CPU is to be responsible to 3 top government officials. If other policy bureaus may also get advice from the CPU, then they have to work through the senior government officials. That is, they have to be told that they don't need to go through the top government officials every time. So one of the top government officials remind the policy bureaus that in relation to this aspect, they may get advice from the CPU. If you continue to read on, whether it is a case of must or may, it is very clear. The bureaus may accept, they may not accept the advice or the recommended candidates. Mr. Lam Tai Fai. Thank you, Mr. President. In your reply, CS, you have said that, and you emphasized that the CPU doesn't have the power to approve or veto appointments. It only provides advice. In relation to this new task, it is to be taken up by Ms. Sophia Kao from the CPU. As everybody knows that she is very experienced in human resources matters, so it is glad that we have got this good candidate. I want to know whether the CPU knew that they got Ms. Kao as the new full-time member, and so they came up with this task, or was it the other way around? If the CPU did not have Ms. Sophia Kao as a full-time member, would they still be getting this new task? Yes, as I have quoted from the paper given by CPU to the PSP, I think you will understand that such papers were prepared a long time ago. It takes time to prepare the paper. They need to get the support from the senior government officials and get the resources before they can submit the paper for approval. Therefore, in that paper, in relation to the need to enhance the cultivation of a reserve of talents, it was already there in the paper. It has been clearly spelled out. So to answer Mr. Lam's question, the authority had the idea and the plan to enhance the cultivation of a reserve of talents before looking for a suitable candidate to take up the post which is already there, which is a full-time member post. So did I understand it correctly? that is the CPU, has already decided on having this task. And it so happens that Ms. Sophia Kao has got the experience, and so she fits the requirement. Mr. Lam Tai-fai, I think what you just raised has already been clearly answered by the CS. I'm sure members have the wisdom to understand the reply from the CS. Mr. LEE Cheuk-yan, our wisdom is certainly that it has been tailor-made for Ms. Sophia Kao, so it's a matter of making appointments on the basis of favoritism. Cultivating talents, the CPU is not cultivating talents, the society is cultivating talents. Mr. LEE Cheuk-yan, it is said that Ms. Kao hasn't got the power to decide, approve, or veto appointments to the advisory bodies. I just want to say that even eunuchs don't have anything. Mr. LEE Cheuk-yan raised a question. Even eunuchs have a lot of powers. Mr. LEE Cheuk-yan, your question. My question is, it is said that she hasn't got any authority. But then if she gives advice, and if everybody knows that she has a CY-learn behind her, you are not asking a question. I'm asking a question. It's very clear. She can make use of the power. If you have asked a question, sit down. I want to know whether the directors of bureau have to take the word of Ms. Sophia Kao. I think you know the answer. CS. First of all, I have to point out that in this chamber and outside this chamber, Mr. LEE Cheuk-yan has been drawing comparisons, and I don't think they are correct. I think the policy bureaus are still the responsible authorities when it comes to the appointment. But then ultimately it rests with the appointing authorities. If Mr. LEE Cheuk-yan thinks that the policy bureaus do not have the ability to deal with the CPU's suggestions and candidates independently, then I think you underestimate the wisdom and ability of the political appointees. We have spent over 24 minutes on this question.
Yeah.
Question 2, Mr. Frankie YICK. Mr. President, some members of the logistics industry have relayed to me that there has all along been a lack of logistics sites for many years. Although the former chief executive mentioned in his policy address in 2009 that the authorities have identified a number of permanent sites around the Kwai-ting area, which is close to our container terminals and airport, for the development of a logistics cluster, the government has only granted 2 sites so far, and other sites may only be released pending the completion of the market and traffic impact assessments. In this connection, will the government inform this council, A, of the timetable for releasing the remaining sites, as well as the areas, locations, and specified uses of those sites? Among such sites, a number of those which were used for storing containers and providing logistics backup services. B, given that some members of the logistics industry have told me that apart from the Kwai-ting area, the authorities will also consider identifying other logistics sites in the Northwest New Territories of the progress update on such task, including the timetable for releasing the sites as well as the areas and locations of those sites. And C, given that the logistics industry has switched to the provision of storage, distribution, and transit services for high-value goods, and these services require a lot of land for the work processes of storing, divanning, and consolidating containers, whether the government will review its current policy on logistics sites and, making reference to the practice of the government in the last century of constructing factory buildings and industrial estates, provide infrastructural facilities to tie in with the development of the logistics industry. For example, constructing government warehouses and lease them to SMEs at cost, so that the development of such enterprises will not be hindered because of inability to afford the high rentals of warehouses built by developers on sites obtained at high bid prices. If it will, of the details of its plan, if not, the reasons for that. Secretary for Transport and Housing. Mr. President, the logistics industry is a traditional pillar industry of Hong Kong. It has over the years made significant contributions towards promoting the economic development and employment in Hong Kong. The logistics industry covers a broad spectrum of service areas, including sea, land, and air terminals, carriage of goods, freight forwarding, storage, and supply chain management. Logistics is no doubt inseparable from warehousing. According to the statistics of the Rating and Valuation Department, private warehouses with a total area of about 3.47 million square meters as at end 2011 are widely distributed in industrial sites across various districts to provide storage facilities for the logistics industry. Furthermore, in Kwai-ching alone, some 100 hectares of land are being used for port backup purposes, including goods vehicle, container vehicle parking, and container storage. In recent years, the logistics industry has gradually shifted towards the handling of high-value goods and provision of high-value added services to respond to market trends. In particular, with the increasing demand for trend-sensitive and upmarket consumer goods in the mainland and other parts of Asia, it has become more important to grasp changes in tastes and to conduct timely marketing and sale of goods. Many overseas brands have therefore set up regional distribution business in Hong Kong to make use of our established strengths, including our efficient and well-connected external transport network, an international airport with a large handling capacity and comprehensive services, a free port, and intellectual property rights protection, etc. These companies engage third-party logistics service providers in Hong Kong for carrying out inventory management and other value-added services such as labeling and packaging before the goods are distributed to other countries or regions at the right time and in the right quantity. These services are described as third-party logistics within the industry. At present, there are many third-party logistics service providers operating in Hong Kong. They own professional knowledge and resources in supply chain management and are geared to planning and managing the flow of goods along the supply chain to cater for the requests of individual consignors. As logistics services are getting more specialized, industry demand for modern logistic facilities has also increased. The government is committed to identifying and providing dedicated land for this type of logistics operation in order to support the industry in the provision of high-value added services. In Hong Kong, where land is a valuable resource, modern logistics centers are built as multi-story buildings, with driveways facilitating the direct access of heavy goods vehicles to various floors for loading and unloading. These logistics centers are purpose-built and are different from conventional warehouses or industrial buildings. Since Kwai-ching is located close to the container terminals and the airport, it is a preferred district for identifying logistics sites. We've completed traffic impact assessments of the proposed logistic developments in Kwai-ching and have released 2 sites in Qingyi with a total area of 4.8 hectares through open tender in 2010 and 2012 respectively. We have stipulated in the lease that the land could only be used for the provision of third-party logistics services, and that such use should not be changed. We plan to release another logistics site of about 2 hectares in Qingyi through open tender in early 2013. In parallel, we're working with the planning department and relevant departments to identify suitable sites outside Kwai-ching and examine their feasibility for logistics use. Tuen Mun West is a key district that we focus on. With the commissioning of the Tuen Mun Chek Lap link, the traveling time between Tuen Mun and the airport will be significantly reduced to approximately 10 minutes, which will make Tuen Mun West more attractive for the development of the logistics industry. In this connection, we're conducting a traffic impact assessment and an ecology assessment for a site of about 3.8 hectares in Tuen Mun West to ascertain its suitability for the construction of a modern logistics center. If the assessment results confirm that the proposed development is feasible, we will submit the proposal for the consideration and approval of the Town Planning Board. Moreover, the administration is reviewing the feasibility of designating some of the land in Tuen Mun West Area 38 for logistics development. In the long term, we will, through various studies, explore if it is feasible to earmark some of the land in the new development areas, for example, Hong Shou and NENT and the reclaimed areas for modern logistics developments. As logistics service is a kind of economic and commercial activities, the administration has released logistics sites to the market in a fair and open manner through the established practice of open tendering to allow enterprises interested in investing in Hong Kong's logistics industry to submit bids. As for industrial estates, they were set up mainly to provide industrial sites for activities which cannot be carried out in an ordinary multi-story industrial commercial building, with a view to broadening the industrial base and upgrading the technology levels of Hong Kong and facilitating the overall economic development. However, the land concerned cannot be used solely for storage purpose. According to information available, at least one logistics company providing high value-added services has been admitted to an industrial estate. We note that logistics enterprises of different sizes all have a strong demand for space. As such, when putting up a logistics site for open tender, we always stipulate in the lease conditions that the land can only be used for provision of logistics services and that the use should not be changed. This restriction should help to lower the bidding price. Besides, the government is open to considering any other effective and feasible measures proposed by the industry to allocate the limited land resources to private enterprises for development of logistics services, provided that the measures give due regard to the principle of fair competition and the need to balance the interests of different stakeholders and the overall development and competitiveness of our industry can be enhanced. Furthermore, we will continue to provide suitable land for port backup uses to facilitate the efficient operation of terminals at the port. To this end, we plan to release sites of about 14 hectares in Kwai-ching in phases to meet the industry's demand for port backup sites from next year onwards. Mr. Frankie YICK. Mr. President, Part 2 of my question asks about the sites to be identified in NWNT and the progress update, including a timetable. And in para 3 of Secretary's reply, it's mentioned that the feasibility of some of the land being designated in Tuen Mun West Area 38 would be looked into. I'd like to know more information about that, including the specific details in the timetable. Secretary. Now, we, together with other departments, are now studying into the matter. We do not have a concrete timetable at the moment, but in relation to this area, we'd like to conduct some basic studies to assess the traffic and other supporting measures in the area. If it's deemed feasible, we will earmark the site as soon as possible. Mr. Vincent Fang. Mr. President, in 2003, in the policy address, the administration already planned to build a multivariate logistics center in northern Lantau. It's very important for logistics companies, and we also think that the sites were suitably identified because the sites were close to the Kwai Chung container terminal and the airport, and also the Zhuhai Hong Kong Macau Bridge will be commissioned in 2016. Now, a decade has passed. There hasn't been much development in the logistic developments in Lantau. I'd like to know whether the administration has set aside this plan, and if it is, please explain why. If not, please tell us the updated timetable. Secretary. Indeed, in 2003, there was a suggestion of a logistic park in Lantau, and it was estimated that 72 hectares of land would have to be reclaimed. It was a large development involving huge investment, and there were environmental impact to be considered as well. So time is needed to study the proposal, and at present we'd like to identify and provide more sites to meet the demands of the industry. We will study the feasibility of reclamation of land to meet this demand, and about this public engagement exercise on the feasibility of reclamation of land outside or appropriate reclamation of land outside the Victoria Harbour. And we'll also look into the feasibility in this regard. Your question hasn't been answered. Yeah, correct. Is it because of environmental concerns and other concerns that this plan had been set aside? Secretary, can you answer the question whether this plan has been set aside? Like I said, we're looking into the feasibility of providing land through reclamation. We did not set aside the plan. Ms. Alice Mack. Well, Secretary, in his answer, said that some sites in Kwai-ching will be earmarked for logistics development. For example, in Para 2, 2 hectares of land in Qingyi will be preserved for logistics development. However, in Kwai-ching district, at present, many sites are preserved for logistics development. But at the same time, the administration has ignored the need of the logistic industry in terms of parking sites for container vehicles or heavy goods vehicles. So drivers find it very difficult to find parking spaces. They need to look for parking spaces in short-term tenancy sites which can only be renewed every 2 years. So has the administration considered the basic needs and requests of the industry? Secretary. Mr. President, as I mentioned in the main reply, in Kwai-ching, there will be 14 hectares for port backup facilities, including the land for goods vehicle or container vehicle parking. Now, as mentioned by Ms. Mack, in Qingyi, we are going to release sites gradually. Those sites used to be industrial sites used by the government, and they will be released for use by goods vehicles. Mr. Chung Kwok-pan. Mr. President, land is the most valuable, most important resource for the logistics industry. The Secretary said that some sites will be earmarked for the logistics development through open tendering. But in the past, only the highest bidders would win the bid, and that results in high bidding prices and high rentals, and only multinational companies can afford it, not local companies. The administration has also proposed revitalization of industrial buildings. So many industrial buildings are currently operating as commercial sites, and with high rentals, SMEs in the logistics industry cannot afford to pay up such a huge cost. Please put your question. What measures do you have to enhance the competitiveness of our logistics industry? For example, you mentioned that the lease conditions will be stipulated. So will there be some sort of Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people policy for the logistics industry, so that sites will be preserved for local logistics companies only? Secretary. Sites have been released for the development of modern logistics centers. And in fact, when we approve the land grant, we have included in the land grant lease conditions that the site should only be used for third-party logistics service, and that the land use should not be changed. And after imposing this change, we believe that in terms of the tendering exercise, the bidding price will be such that it will be conducive to competition in the market. Because with this lease condition, the bidding price will be different. For these sites will be different than for other sites. Mr. Poon Siu-ping. Mr. President, logistics industry is an important economic pillar of Hong Kong. And Secretary just now said that about 14.6 hectares, according to my calculation, will be made available for logistics development. And in the past, we asked about the logistic park in Lantau, which covers 72 hectares. So, Secretary, do you have a long-term plan in terms of the total area of land to be available for logistics services? Secretary. Mr. President, in various districts in Hong Kong, we have industrial sites, and these industrial sites can be used for logistics services. for the modern logistics services that we emphasized just now, they need special facilities. For example, they need floors with high clearance. They need driveways with direct access of vehicles to every floor. And we're at the initial stage. We're trying to gauge the market response. And according to the recent tendering exercise, the response has been positive. So we will be heading in this direction. Now, according to the original estimate of this large piece of land in Lantau, our assessment is that not all sites will be used for this purpose. Mr. Chang Han-peng. The construction of a logistics park will attract goods vehicles and heavy goods vehicles traveling to and from and in the vicinity of the park. And as far as local residents of Kwai-ting is concerned, the traveling of heavy goods vehicles in the area would cause them to be very much upset. And in terms of noise near the logistics sites, the government handles the complaints in the same manner. If it's as a noise that happened on the roadside, they will measure the noise level, and local residents have to close the windows to shut off the noise. Now, my question is, does the administration have any measure to address the concerns of local residents? Will noise barriers and other alleviating measures be provided? Because without these measures, the administration's plan to provide a logistic park will have to be delayed. Mr. Chan, you're giving a speech. Secretary, let me reply to Mr. Chan's question in this way. Now, in relation to logistic centers or logistic facilities for the provision of high value-added services, basically, the work is carried out indoors, and the loading and unloading and parking of heavy good vehicles actually take place indoors. Basically, there is no noise nuisance caused to local residents. As for whether local residents living nearby where goods vehicles traveling through would be affected, we will definitely conduct environmental impact assessment, which will confirm that the basic level has not been exceeded, and only under those circumstances will we permit vehicles to go to travel past the spots. Your question hasn't been answered. I think Secretary hasn't answered my question. Just now, he talks about the logistic parks with indoor operation. I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, please repeat the part of the questions which you think Secretary hasn't answered. Please refrain from giving a speech. Just repeat the question. You don't have to say what you think. Basically, I asked him in relation to the noise standards. So what is your question? That is whether a particular standard will be adopted in the handling of the noise issues surrounding the logistics park rather than the normal standard. Well, if you give a long speech in your question, members, you will only make your question ambiguous. So please put a precise and concise question. Secretary. Well, just now the member's question was in relation to noise caused by vehicles traveling past the residential area nearby, and whether this will hinder the development of the logistics center. And as far as we know, the noise issue hasn't deteriorated in that area, and the noise generated actually is in compliance with the relevant requirement. Mr. Leung. In June 2009, the administration submitted a paper to LEGCO, saying that they're actively considering the southwest of Qingyi for the construction of container terminal number 10, and the feasibility report was expected to be completed in 2011. In February this year, the Financial Secretary expressed that the feasibility study would not be completed until the end of this year. So my question for the administration is concerning the progress update of container terminal number 10. Can you give us some information? Mr. Ng, your question, what is the relevance of your question to the main question? This is an issue in order of providing supporting measures for the development of logistics services in the future. Well, it's not directly relevant to this question, but I'm happy to take this question. We're conducting 2 studies at the moment. One is in terms of the technical investigation study and the environmental study of southwest of Qingyi. The other study is a long-term assessment or forecast of the overall picture of the logistic industry in Hong Kong and whether there is a need for another container terminal. And these 2 studies are underway, and we will come up with a decision after the 2 studies are completed. We've spent 23.5 minutes on this question.
The third oral question. The Honorable Alan Leong Kah-kit, President, on the day after assumption of office, the CE indicated that the government hoped to achieve the goal of zero food waste eventually. The Secretary for the Environment has also said that the government will actively support reduction of food waste. It has been reported that the CE's wife has set up a company in the middle of this month to promote the reduction of food waste. According to his proposal, the company will deploy manpower resources to undertake such work as food distribution, public education, and research, etc. And it plans to collaborate with various organizations in its work, lobby the government to introduce legislation in this regard, and solicit funds from the business sector. In this connection, will the government inform this council? A. According to the current requirements on declaration of interests, whether the CE is required to declare the companies set up by his spouse, which are directly related to the policies actively promoted by the government. If such declaration is required, of the details and whether such declaration is available for public inspection. If such declaration is not required, of the reasons for that. B. Whether it has assessed if it will give rise to perceived or real conflict of interest when, on the one hand, the government actively promotes the policy of food waste reduction, and on the other hand, the CE's wife has set up a company engaged in food waste treatment. If the assessment result is in the affirmative, of the details. If the assessment result is in the negative, the reasons for that. And C. Whether the operation of companies by the spouses and immediate family members of the CE and politically appointed officials or PAOs, as well as their acceptance of government subsidies or donations from the business sector through such companies, are subject to regulation by existing legislation or codes for CE and PAOs on prevention of conflict of interests. If so, whether it is assessed if the case mentioned above violates the relevant requirements. If such regulation is not in place, whether the government has considered expanding the scope of the relevant legislation or codes to cover such a situation to prevent conflict of interest. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. President. In consultation with the CE's office and the Environment Bureau, I am authorized to respond to the member's question on behalf of the administration as follows. A. As the President of the Executive Council EXCO, the CE declared his registrable interests in accordance with the arrangements applicable to EXCO members. Under the requirements of the existing EXCO declaration mechanism, if the member himself or with or on behalf of his spouse or children holds a beneficial interest in shareholdings of companies, both listed and unlisted ones, or other bodies, and the nominal value of the shareholdings is greater than 1% of the issued share capital, the member has to declare to its knowledge the names of the companies and bodies concerned. Although the CE is himself not a politically appointed official or PAO, and hence not subject to the requirements of the Code for officials under the Political Appointment System or the PAO Code, he declared his financial and other interests in accordance with the arrangements applicable to PAOs under the PAO Code. The current declaration system under the PAO Code requires PAOs of all ranks to declare their investment, shareholding, or direct or indirect interest in any company, their directorships, proprietorships, or partnerships in any company, and, if any, the specific details concerning the participation in any private company's affairs. They are also required to declare any investment and interest held by himself, herself, or in the name of his or her spouse, children, or other persons, agents, or companies, but are actually acquired on his, her account, or in which he, she has a beneficial interest. The open portion of the declarations, which cover the names of the PAO's spouses and names of the organizations which their spouses work for, are placed on the websites of their respective offices, bureaus for public inspection. The CE's declaration in respect of the above two arrangements has been uploaded to the website of the CE's office for public inspection. B. According to information provided by the ENB, food waste accounts for around 40% or some 9,000 tons of municipal solid waste disposed of in Hong Kong's landfills every day. The administration's key strategy in this area is to avoid and reduce the production of food waste. The food waste that will nevertheless be produced should be retrieved and recycled as much as possible. Over the years, relevant policy bureaus have explained to the general public the administration's food waste strategy through papers issued to the Legislative Council and the website of the Environment Protection Department. Through education and promotional activities as well as efforts on various fronts, the administration has raised the public's awareness and promoted food waste avoidance and reduction among the public and relevant trades. Various organizations in the community participate in food waste avoidance and reduction. Support and cooperation of the general public, as well as positive response and participation from more sectors of the community, are essential to the proper treatment of food waste. The administration, therefore, welcomes efforts made by more individuals and organizations in the community to help reduce food waste and turn it into useful resources where food waste will nevertheless be produced. The CE and the CE's office have not participated in Mrs. Regina Leong's activities related to food waste recycling. The CE's office understands from Mrs. Leong that the Food for Good project is non-profit making in nature and aims to contribute to environmental sustainability through establishing a platform to promote food waste recycling and waste reduction at source in Hong Kong. The project also proposes to donate food it receives to the needy in society. The Food for Good project hopes to bring together people of similar views to advocate for food waste recycling at various levels, including the community, the catering industry, residential estates, and schools. The ultimate objective of this project is to promote in the community the message of treasuring food and proper attitudes in handling food waste. According to our understanding, Food for Good was incorporated in November this year, but has not actually started operation. Mrs. Leong is one of the founding members of the project. After the project is formally launched, she will resign her directorship and take up an honorary post. The project is non-profit making in nature. Mrs. Leong will not get any economic benefit from the project. C. As mentioned in Part A of my reply, the CE will, in accordance with arrangements applicable to PAOs under the PAO Code, make declaration on the relevant information and avoid cases of conflict of interest. Apart from the offense of bribery under the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance Cap. 201, it will be an offense of misconduct in public office under the common law if a public servant, including the CE and PAOs, without lawful authority or reasonable excuse, commits serious misconduct while carrying out official or official-related duties. The provisions relating to bribery in the ordinance, which are applicable to everyone, are also applicable to the CE, PAOs, their spouses, and their immediate family. For example, Section 2(2) of the ordinance stipulates that a person is deemed to have solicited or accepted directly or indirectly an advantage, regardless of whether the relevant acts are performed by the person concerned or any other person acting on his behalf. Section 4(1) provides that any person who, whether in Hong Kong or elsewhere, without lawful authority or reasonable excuse, offers an advantage to a public servant as an inducement to or reward for or otherwise on account of that public servant's acts as prescribed in the relevant provisions shall be guilty of an offense. Understand that Mrs. Leong wishes to play a part in environmental protection through promoting the Food for Good project. As a member of the community, Mrs. Leong wishes to contribute to Hong Kong. The project is non-profit making in nature, and she will not obtain any economic benefit from the project. It is believed there should not be a question of conflict of interest. Mr. Alan Leong. President, after reading the reply, either the CE's office its ability to understand matters is really so low that it is surprising, or it is a deliberate act of ducking the issue, because the Secretary has not answered parts B and C of my question. Now, it is said that as long as the CE does not hold a company in his name, then for his wife to hold a company, there is no need to make any declaration. And if you read the New York Times, it is said that Premier Wen Jiabao, he himself does not hold any company, but his wife and his mother do. According to the reply by the Secretary, these circumstances cannot be avoided, and he has no intention to improve the present mechanism so that such a situation will not arise again. Is my understanding correct or not correct? SCMA? President, in my main reply, I have sought to answer the points raised in the question, and that is the companies mentioned, and also that the company is established and promoted by Mrs. Leong, and whether there is perceived or actual conflict of interest. In my main reply, I have already stated that the relevant company is non-profit making in nature, and that Mrs. Leong is not going to get any economic benefit from it. And also, according to the CE's office, Mrs. Leong will take up an honorary post after resigning her directorship when the project is formally launched. In other words, it is only going to be a nominal kind of duty. Therefore, there should not be any question of conflict of interest. Thank you. Your supplementary has not been answered. Please repeat it. That's correct. As long as the CE himself does not hold a company in his name, he can give a free hand for his wife, his friends, in order to hold companies. Under the EXCO's declaration of interest mechanism, such situations cannot be avoided. Is that right? That is my supplementary. You are asking about declaration. Exactly. I'm asking whether such a situation can still arise. As long as the CE does not hold any company or shares in any company himself, he can condone the holding. What do you mean by condoning? Well, let's say he can allow. Let me say he can allow. Let me use a more neutral verb. As long as the CE himself does not act as a shareholder, but he allows or tacitly allows people, including his wife, to become shareholders. According to the present declaration of interest mechanism of the EXCO, he doesn't have to declare this, and the relatives or the wife can continue. Your supplementary is already clear. It's about declaration. Secretary. Thank you, President. In my main reply, I have already mentioned that the CE as chairman of EXCO has acted according to the arrangements applicable to EXCO. Let me say more. Actually, EXCO members, in terms of declaration with regard to companies, there are strict regulations. The EXCO members, including the CE, would have to declare such interests held by their spouses, companies, children, or other persons, but which are actually held by themselves. And we are actually talking about land and property-related companies. In other words, in our declaration system, we target the PAOs, members of EXCO and the CE. Whether or not the name of the official is mentioned, that is not our main concern. Now, of course, if it is in their own name, they have to declare it. But even if they do not hold the companies in their own name, if it is held by the spouse or children, however, if they are actually the beneficial interest holders, then they have to declare it. The member was asking if the shares are only held by the spouse, then does it mean that there is no need to declare those? President, if in fact the shares are held by the spouse or family members, then according to the present mechanism, there is no need to declare those. Dr. Joseph Lee. Thank you, President. The reply of the Secretary says that the CE is regulated by two mechanisms. One, the EXCO declaration mechanism, and the other one, the PAO code. Theoretically, the CE should be subject to these two mechanisms. However, in this incident, the CE's wife, Mrs. Leong, has this company, but he has not answered Mr. Alan Leong's question about perceived conflict of interest. She has not done anything to avoid any suspicion. Now, I don't know whether this will set a precedent so that the administration will actually write a law to regulate the CE and his family members. If he himself or his family members are suspected to have conflict of interest, even if he himself does not have any conflict of interest, just let us look at this example set up by Mrs. Leong. This has a particular interest. And therefore, shouldn't we have a law to regulate the CE and his family members so that we know everything clearly instead of just relying on the present two mechanisms, which are seemingly quite ineffective? You're asking the Secretary whether the law will be amended. Secretary, under the present declaration mechanism, as I said, there is one applying to EXCO members, and also Mr. Joseph Lee has mentioned the PAO code. In my main reply, I have already said that the investment, shareholding, or direct or indirect interest held by the family members, etc., if the actual interest is held by the official himself, then these should also be declared. And as I said, the names of organizations which the spouses work for, etc., are also to be declared. And as I said, the CE has already declared the name of his spouse and also occupation held by his family members. And also, according to the PAO code, all ranks of PAOs should avoid being suspected of dishonesty or conflict of interest. And also, when they execute their official duties, if their personal interest can or is perceived to have an impact on their judgment, then he has to report to the CE. So whether it be under the EXCO mechanism or the PAO code, we believe there are already different regulatory regimes to remind the CE and PAOs to be careful to avoid conflict of interest if it has anything to do with their spouse and family members. This is the general regulation. But with regard to this present incident, as I quoted from the CE office understanding, Mrs. Leong is an advocate or promoter. He's one of the founding members. But then after the project is formally launched, she will resign from the directorship and will take up an honorary post. And since the project itself is non-profit making in nature, as said in the articles of association of the company, it is non-profit making in nature. Mrs. Leong will not get any economic benefit from the project. So there shouldn't be a question of conflict of interest. Ms. Cyd Ho, sorry, Mr. Joseph Lee, what's the problem? You have already asked my question, but the Secretary has just repeated his main reply. He has not told me whether he will do what I asked. Well, I'm of the view that the Secretary has already stated very clearly that he is of the view that the present mechanism is quite sufficient. Ms. Cyd Ho, thank you, President. Members of the public are concerned that people who are well connected might seek private gain from their official connections. Now, this particular incident has to do with Mrs. Regina Leung, who has a family relationship with the one who has the biggest power in Hong Kong. This Food for Thought is not a charity. It is a registered company. Structurally speaking, it can certainly try to make a profit. My question for the Secretary is, according to your understanding, now Mrs. Regina Leung has made use of the CE's office in order to meet with green groups in order to talk to them about the handling of food waste. I'd like to know more about the future operation of this Food for Good company. I'd like to know whether the wife of the CE can make use of government facilities in order to handle the affairs of a private company. Does the property management agency of the CE's office know about this? Will you conduct an in-depth investigation, and also whether you will try to ban such activities which seek to make use of official premises for private activities? Secretary, after reunification, be it the wife of the governor or the wife of the CE, they might take up honorary official posts. Say, for example, charities will enlist the wife of governors or wife of CE to take up honorary posts in order to promote the charitable aims of these entities. Will give the right kind of support for then wives of governors and also wife of CEs so that they can discharge these honorary official duties. Ms. Cyd Ho mentioned a particular company and a particular situation, but I do not have the information at hand in order to give a reply. However, as I said, if the CE's wife acts in her capacity as the CE's wife and discharges official duties, will give her the support she needs. Is it that your supplementary has not been answered? Please repeat it. Exactly. I have said clearly at the outset that this is a company which is a registered company. It can make a profit. It is not a registered charitable fund. However, the Secretary has mixed this up with honorary official duties. I was asking you whether you would ban such activities in the future. This is a kind of misconduct in public office because you're making use of a government facility in order to organize activities for a private company. I'm asking you whether this will be banned. This is a factual question. Ms. Cyd Ho, you have already made a very serious accusation in asking your supplementary. If you ask the administration whether there are policies to ban the CE's wife from making use of the CE's office to conduct meetings of a private company, well, I think that will be a more appropriate way to ask the supplementary. Secretary, any supplement? President, I can only add that from the information I have at hand, the Food for Good project says in its articles of association at different places that it is a non-profit making entity in nature. Therefore, I'm of the view that this is not an organization for profit making. This is what I can see from the information at hand. And as I was saying just now, if Mrs. Leung acts in her capacity as the wife of the CE, and when she discharges honorary official duties, will give the relevant support. Ms. Cyd Ho's particular question, as I said, I don't have the information at hand to give further replies. We have spent almost 23 minutes on this question.
Chun HO Sau-lan.
Question number 4, Ms. Cyd Ho. President, thank you. It was reported in the press on October the 19th this year that the police had procured a new type of weapon called long-range acoustic device, commonly known as sound cannons, which could be used to disperse participants of demonstrations and public gatherings. The press reports also pointed out that the sound cannons can produce high-frequency sound waves that could impair hearing. In response to the press report, police issued a press release stating that the police had put in place very strict codes and guidelines on the use and that the device would only be used in anti-riot operations. The government informed its council of the details of the sound cannons, including the model, efficacy, lethality, coverage, and potential hazards to human health, and whether they will harm people who are not the target. B, of the weaponry used by the police prior to the procurement of the sound cannons for handling the situations which are now handled by sound cannons, whether the police procurement was due to the inadequacies of such weaponry, if there are inadequacies of the details, whether the police had other reasons for procuring sound cannons, and see how the police determine what situations are riots which call for the use of sound cannons, of the channels through which the public may inspect the police codes and guidelines, whether the authorities have consulted healthcare professionals and IPCC on the codes, if they have, of the views collected. If not, why not? Secretary for Security. President, to maintain their operational and response capability, the police force regularly review and renew their equipment with reference to such equipment used by their counterparts around the world. The administration's reply to the member's question is as follows. First, I must point out that the long-range acoustic device, LRAD, procured by the police force is a broadcasting system, not a weapon. It can effectively help the police to convey important messages over a long range in a noisy environment, in a bid to preserve public safety, public order, and prevent injury to life and property. In line with the circumstances and operational needs, various police districts and formations currently use sound devices of different types and models, including portable and floor-type broadcasting devices, as well as public announcement or PA systems on police vehicles such as patrol vehicles and motorcycles. According to the police actual operational experiences, the effective transmission range of the PA system on police vehicles is estimated to be around 50 meters. As for the sound quality, volume, and transmission range of such systems are comparatively inferior to those of the LRADs. They are not in a position to competently achieve the effect of making long-range public announcements in a noisy environment. In procuring armored vehicles in 2009, the Police Tactical Unit Headquarters also purchased 2 LRADs with an effective transmission range of about 300 meters. The 2 devices can only be used together with the armored vehicles in circumstances such as serious disasters, counter-terrorism operations, or severe security incident for broadcasting purposes in a noisy environment, with an aim to effectively convey messages to the crowd over a long range or to facilitate evacuation exercises, etc. In addition, subsequent to the incident of Hong Kong residents being taken hostage in the Philippines in 2010, the Police Negotiation Cadre, or PNC, reviewed measures of handling critical incidents of similar nature. At the time the incident took place, the distance between the local police officers who were handling the incident and the coach on which the hostages were being kept was over 100 meters, rendering it difficult for the officers to communicate with the abductor. In the light of this incident, the PNC considered necessary to procure a sound device for effective communication over a long range. 2 portable LRADs were then purchased for handling critical incidents. For instance, in hostage-taking incidents whereby the police are confronted, for the security of on-spot officers, negotiators may use such a device to initiate a conversation with the abductors at a safe distance. In cases of attempted suicide, whereby a person attempting to commit suicide at a dangerous location, such as the Chiang Mai Bridge, negotiators may start a conversation by means of this device for the purpose of life saving. The effective transmission range of the two portable LRADs is about 250 meters. The four LRADs go with an alert tone function. According to the manufacturer's information, the alert tone is similar to the siren used by the police and the fire services department. Its frequency is within our normal hearing range, and it can easily draw public attention. It is also indicated in the manufacturer's information that, unlike what is said in some of the reports, the LADs do not generate ultra-low frequency, which will cause dizziness, nausea, or loss of sense of direction to the recipients. The police stressed that the purpose of procuring the LRADs is to convey important messages over a long range in a noisy environment. So far, the police have not used the LRADs in any one of their operations, while reiterating that the LRADs will not be used in public meetings and processions. According to the safety guidelines provided by the manufacturer, as the LRAD can produce significantly loud sound, any improper use of the device, i.e. continuous broadcasting with maximum volume range from an unsafe distance or angle, may cause hearing impairment. In this connection, there are stringent rules and operational guidelines on the use of these kind of devices. The operational guidelines comply strictly with the manufacturer's safety guidelines. Officers operating the LRADs must receive prior operational and safety training, and they should strictly adhere to the operational guidelines. Any use of LRADs shall be approved by the highest officer in charge of the formation concerned, i.e. an officer of superintendent to chief superintendent rank, and its on-site use shall be approved by an officer of inspectorate rank or above. The LRAD must be operated by designated officers who have received proper training. In case the highest volume range shall be used, another trained officer must be present to assist in observing the actual surroundings to ensure that the operator achieve the objectives of the operation in a safe manner without causing impairment to any persons around. Ms. Cyd HO. President, I am terribly unhappy to hear the lie that this is not a weapon. In 2007, the Department Army of the U.S. said
to cause discomfort to the listener, and that this type of use would convert the LRAD from being only a communication device to become a non-lethal weapon. 另外呢，喺德國嘅
Also in German Science and Global Security periodical, it also uses acoustic weapon to refer to this. The NATO also used weapon to refer to this sound cannon. Why do you conceal the fact that this sound cannon would cause permanent hearing impairment? And you're telling us that this is not a kind of weapon. Why is it the authorities are concealing all these facts? Secretary. President, first of all, I take issue with the allegation that we are concealing facts. In my principal reply, I've made it very clear that the police procure this device for the purpose of broadcasting. Ms. Ho mentioned that in other places they use these kind of devices for some other purposes. I don't want to speculate on their purposes. Now, if anybody uses a loudspeaker right by your ear, then it would cause impairment for sure. I keep emphasizing that we do follow strict guidelines in procuring these devices, the operators will have to follow the guidelines. In the actual operation, the targets have to be at a safe distance before the broadcasting would be made, like the PA system on our armored vehicles. We have a transmission range of 300 meters, but unsafe distance would be 50 meters. The guidelines make it very clear that when using the device, the target should be beyond the 50 meters. That is a part of the safety guidelines. Now, as regards the portable one, the transmission range can be 250 meters, but the safe distance would be 10 meters. We make it very clear that it is only within the safe distance that the devices can be used. In other jurisdictions, what they use and how they use the devices doesn't apply to Hong Kong. We're making use this for broadcasting purposes. It's just like a large loudspeaker. This is made clear in our training. Ms. Cyd HO, question unanswered? Yes, President, the question is unanswered. It was said that as long as they follow the guidelines, they can be used as for broadcasting purposes. But from the information I read out, this can be used as a weapon instead of just for broadcasting purposes. Why do you conceal this fact? Whatever guidelines you're following? Ms. Cyd HO, I think the Secretary has already answered your question. If you're not content with the reply, I don't think it's a good idea to engage in a debate here. Ms. Cyd HO, well, this is the nature of the device, and you're merely talking about the guidelines. Why don't you tell us this can be a weapon? Yes, please be seated. Mr. Charles Mok. According to the principal reply, these sound cannon or LRAD, they haven't been used for 3 years. I'm wondering how much was incurred for the procurement of these devices. How many, whatever weapons the police might have, you haven't used this device at all. I mean, does it constitute any wasteful use of taxpayers' money? Secretary, President, in discharging their duty, the police would encounter two kinds of scenarios. First, they do have to have the day-to-day equipment like the emergency vehicles, the walkie-talkies, and so on. And the other important duty of the police is to have the ability to guard against certain scenarios like counter-terrorism operations. The fact that we don't have terrorism doesn't mean that we shouldn't have the ability. In procuring the device, we reviewed the transmission range of the existing loudspeakers, and they are quite undesirable. In urban areas, they can reach something like 50 meters. What about the situation when we have to make broadcasting over a long range? Now, if the police are anticipating problems, and if they are making sure that their effectiveness will measure up to international standard, then it will only be good for the members of the public. In overseas jurisdictions, the use of these devices may also be suitable to Hong Kong. In 2005, Katrina hit the U.S. This device was used to broadcast the messages. Now, this situation can happen to Hong Kong. It hasn't happened in Hong Kong. It doesn't mean that it might not happen in future. It is wrong for the police not to make the preparation. And also in the U.S., there were there were confrontations at gunpoint, and there were broadcasts of a recording of the hostage smother, and the hostage taker gave up eventually. Well, I'm saying that you can anticipate problems. You don't have to tell us how useful these devices are. My question is, how many devices have not been used and how much has been spent on the devices? Mr. Mok, you are casting doubt on the cost-effectiveness of this device and asking the government to review it. Now, you went on to talk about other devices, and I mean, does the Secretary have anything to add? Well, I haven't got the information on other devices. Mr. James To. President, what is of concern to us is that these devices might be employed for like the unarmed demonstrators and so on. Now, in his reply, the Secretary said that these will not be used in public meetings and processions. This may sound reassuring, but in the reply, he also mentioned the counter-terrorism operations. My question is, are you using these devices to warn the terrorists and to urge them to surrender because they are surrounded in public meetings and processions? If they turn confrontational, and you may be tempted to use these devices to drown them out and to turn up the volume, but and cause dizziness and nausea. Are you going to use these devices in those kind of scenarios? Secretary. President, first of all, we're not going to use the devices in public meetings or processions. In Hong Kong, these public meetings and processions, the demonstrators are walking on the street together with the police. I'm talking about the safe distance in which this will be used. It is impossible for us to use this in public meetings and processions within the 50 meters. Now, whether it is within 50 meters or not, we keep emphasizing that this is for broadcasting purposes. There are some reports about other jurisdictions using the devices in this way. As I said, you can use the loudspeaker by the ear of someone, and this is not what the police is going to do. We're going to use the devices for broadcasting purposes, and it's only within safe distance that these devices will be employed. Now, you talked about a riot. If we use these in a riot situation, we procure the armored vehicles, and they are catering for the extreme situation of a riot. In our training, we require the armored vehicle to be at a certain distance, at least 100 meters where possible. It is very simple because we don't really want the police to be caught short, even when they are not in formation. So these devices would be in line with the needs. We have to make sure that they are not within the 50 meters. You've read the reports in other jurisdictions. That's how they do it. But the police in Hong Kong are not using these devices for these purposes. We're merely using them for broadcasting purposes to disperse, to tell them to evacuate. Mr. To, will you repeat the question that remains unanswered? Now, in the penultimate paragraph, he said that this will not be used in public meetings and processions. But for non-peaceful public meetings and processions, are you going to use them against them? Secretary, no, we will only use them for broadcasting purposes. We have to assess the safe distance. In the light of our experience in dealing with public meetings and processions, the existing loudspeakers would be sufficient, and we don't really need to use the LRADs. Mr. Joseph Lee. President, this is a controversial subject. is it really a sound cannon, or is it a weapon, or is it merely used as a loudspeaker, according to the police, or the secretary, in fact? This is more like a massive loudspeaker, and it can be lethal. In part 3 of the question, this is very controversial, and this is making us feeling unease. Now we have the IPCC. I think we ought to discuss with the IPCC. Now this might cause unease, it might cause discomfort. The IPCC can handle complaints. If I may put this to the Secretary, will you or have you talked to the IPCC about this whole matter? Secretary? Under the IPCC ordinance, it is very clear that the IPCC is there to monitor, observe, and review the handling of complaints by the police and make recommendations in relation to these complaints. Or in relation to relevant complaints, the IPCC can make recommendations for improvements, or it can also make recommendations regarding the protocol adopted by the police. Now, in procuring these LRADs, I've made it very clear that our purpose is to use them for broadcasting purposes, just like any loudspeakers, the procedures for procuring other loudspeakers. So we have to look at the safety of these devices, whether they are in line with our needs. After consideration, they are in line with our requirements. We procured them. If the IPCC would like to find out more about it, the police would be only too delighted to talk to them, and we can invite the IPCC members to observe the use and also the training. If the IPCC sees the need, we will tie in with their requirements. We spent 22 minutes on this question.
The fifth question, Mr. Kwok-him. Thank you, Mr. President. The police's third-generation command and control communication system broke down in the morning of the 24th of October 2012, during which some consuls of the Hong Kong Island Regional Command and Control Center could not communicate with frontline police officers through the CC3 and could only maintain communication with them using the force mobile radio telephone. CC3 resumed normal only after 17 hours at 4 a.m. the following day. The police have ruled out the possibility of a man-made sabotage or a hacker intrusion causing damages to the CC3. In this connection, will the government inform the Council of the direction along which the police are currently investigating the causes of the failure, as well as the impact of failure on the work of the frontline police officers? B, of the number of cases of system failure, including all incidents of the CC3 that have occurred so far since its coming into operation at the end of 2004, as well as the causes of the failure, and C, whether the police have conducted regular reviews on the effectiveness and security issues, for example, etc., of the CC3, if they have, of the frequency of such reviews, if not, the reasons for that. I thought that I've miscounted the number of Mr. Charles Mok, and therefore I asked Mr. Mok to ask his questions. I would like to apologize to members who have a higher ranking in the queue. Mr. Mok, you have already asked 7 times as the Secretary of Security. The police's third-generation command and control communication system came into operation in phases since December 2004. The system was fully implemented in March 2006 with the objectives of increasing the operational efficiency of the police so that more effective manpower deployment and resource utilization can be achieved, and of enhancing the security of the communication system and internal transmission of information. The administration's reply to the member's question is as follows. As for A and B, regular repair and maintenance of the CC3 has been conducted since it came into operation in 2004. A serious failure of the CC3 occurred on the 24th of October 2012 at about 11:05 a.m., in which the radio communication between various consoles of regional command and control centers and some frontline officers were affected. The police's information wing and the system provider have conducted an in-depth investigation into the failure on the day in question and carried out a number of simulation tests on the system. It has been ascertained that the failure was not related to hacker intrusion or system aging. There was a software problem during system extension which led to system instability. The failure was due to the police's extension of the CC3 to the airport district where the system had not been adopted. Since most of the police districts had moved to the CC3, the police had to undertake system extension to enhance cross-district radio communication for officers of the airport district. On the day in question, there were irregularities due to some software problem when the CC3's radio coverage was extended to the airport district, leading to a malfunction of the radio cell sites connected to the main server of the Hong Kong Island Communication System Zone. Given that the main server of the HKI zone is linked to some cell sites in Kowloon and the New Territories zones, the radio coverage of the latter two zones was also slightly affected. The failure in question only affected the radio communication between some frontline officers and the regional console. The ISW and the system provider undertook emergency repair at once and carried out some improvement measures. Affected frontline officers immediately switched to the force mobile radio phone to maintain communication with the regional console. The failure did not affect emergency and non-emergency services provided by various police regions to the public. During the period of system failure, a total of 179 emergency calls were received and processed by the force, and officers all arrived at the scenes within the pledged response time. The police is reviewing the current procedures of system alteration or extension with the system provider. To avoid similar failures, certain improvement measures have been adopted, such as multiple reviews of system alteration or extension plans and procedures, examination of further strengthening of system fallback, and the study of recovery methods against different failure scenarios. In-depth reviews are still underway to ensure that all system alterations will not be affected in the future. C. The police and the system provider conduct monthly system testing and review system operations every month to ensure that the system is in good conditions and to guard against serious failures. Furthermore, the police and the system provider will, prior to any major activities or important events, assess whether the system can cope with the additional operational needs arising from such activities or events and make appropriate system resource deployment, such as strengthening radio coverage at locations with high usage rate and increase the capacity of communication channels. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Kwok-him. The Secretary, in his replies to Part 8 and B, said that emergency and non-emergency services provided were not affected. I take note of that. But there is a fact that when there was the incident, I heard that they maintain communication through the force mobile radio telephone. But as for the ascertaining of position or location, that could not be done. Will the Secretary review the situation so as to make sure that this problem can also be resolved. Now, should there be a similar incident, as for a frontline officer on duty, that may be a serious threat. The Secretary. Thank you, Mr. President. Let me stress that the fallback or the backup system is still in operation, or was still in operation. The incident only caused more blind spots. As a result, when police officers were at the blind spots, they could not communicate with the console. The backup system is to deal with such kinds of situation. Resorting to the forced mobile radio telephone is one of the backup arrangements. These are backup measures within the system. Let me stress that during the operation of the backup system, it wasn't the case that all police officers in the Hong Kong Island region could not communicate with the console. In fact, communication only declined by 7 or 8%. And there were other means to communicate with the frontline officers. For example, the deployment of emergency vehicles and patrol vehicles to respond. Now, the present problem was caused by a software problem, and we have made a number of we have introduced a number of measures. Now, the problem was caused by an extension, so we've ceased all extension. And when there is any change to the system, we have to go through multiple reviews and checking before implementation. And we conduct monthly testing and make reports. And when there is any change to the system, there must be a supervisor at the scene, and all parties have to agree to the change to procedures. And for testing, it will be done at times of low usage in order to minimize the impact if there is any failure. And we will also step up our basic security arrangement. We have excluded the possibility of hacking, but we have been reminded of the importance of the security of the system. So the basic security of the system in terms of personnel and also in terms of the security of the rooms, we have reviewed that, and we are also conducting a review. We want to consider different approaches to revitalizing the system, and we also consider the issue of capacity and system fallback. And also multiple links. Now, when system A is a problem, then system B can back up, and then system C can back up. When A is having a problem, B and C can also back up. So we can have multiple backup arrangements to make the system safer and more effective. Mr. Jeffrey Lam. Mr. President, the CC3 had a serious problem, had a serious failure. Does it mean that CC3 had some fatal weaknesses? Is it outdated? And will the administration consider upgrading CC3 to CC4 to ensure the system to be safe? And if there is no upgrading, are there any remedial measures? The Secretary. Mr. President, the police and the provider know what the problem is. It is about the extension of the system rather than the aging of the system. Now we need more time to deal. We spent more time on dealing with the system failure because the system is big. We took time to conduct the investigation. We made a risk assessment, and most important of all, we had to stop any deterioration. And we were worried that if we did something on Part A, that might have repercussions on Part B and C. And it took time. And it was also necessary to confirm it wasn't caused by hackers. Now, if it was hacker intrusion, it might be taken in phases. We had to exclude that possibility. And we also had to consider the reason of sabotage. In doing so, we also had to, and furthermore, we also had to conduct hardware tests to see if we had to replace any devices. As for system testing, we have a fallback system. As for the problem, it was we found that we could have done better by a multiple linking system, and we are also considering expanding our fallback system. Now, the total failure time was 17 hours. During the time, experts had meetings to consider the situation. This was the first time, and we had to collect data of the system. And concerning the recovery arrangement, although a decision was made at a certain stage, one had to consider whether the recovering method would cause any unexpected chain effects. And the experts had to consider the matter very carefully. And finally, we also had to consider whether there was any fallback if the recovery arrangement failed. It took 17 hours or more. 17 hours. The problem was not related to aging. CC3 is able to meet the needs of the police force. Mr. Tam Yu-chung, with regard to this failure, which was rather serious, and the acting secretary said that it was as long as 17 hours. Now, the reasons had been identified, and there were 4 improvement measures. Now, since it was a serious failure, I am still worried. Still, you have the 4 major measures. You really need to ensure that the problem will not reoccur. And in the process, you used mobile phones to step in, to stand by. But there are many blind spots. Now, will you instruct the police officers in the case that discover any blind spots of the CC3, they will have to report it so that you can establish a database of blind spots in order to improve the CC3. The Secretary. Mr. President, in fact, there is established procedure. If a police officer discovers that a certain location is a blind spot, he has to report. And the ISW will then, or rather the police officers responsible for information security will make immediate remedial arrangements. With the introduction of CC3, we have been improving our system and reduce the blind spots. And there are records of improvements. We share a common concern with Mr. Tam. The police is very careful and serious and positive about resolving all the blind spots. Thank you. Mr. Paul Chair. Mr. President, the system was introduced in 2004, and according to reply, paragraph C, the second generation of CC3 couldn't be fully extended, and therefore you have the extension to the airport. I want to know which district has not been covered by the CC3 and when will the extension be completed. the member is right in pointing out this issue. CC3 only covers the police districts on land. At present, it is because we have built many transmission stations and transponders. The police, the airport district has certain constraints, and before extending the coverage, the airport district is using its own communication system. Since all police districts are using CC3, if the airport district can use CC3 as well, then it will be better. This is our target. And we also need to tie in our development with the development of the communication system of the airport. As a result, we have this extension arrangement. And we tried to extend the system to cover the airport. As for what other districts we want to extend the system, it is the MTR district. With the construction of the new MTR lines, they will be covered by the CC3. But for older MTR lines, when they were built, they had their own system. So some MTR police officers are also not using the CC3. Now, apart from the new lines, at appropriate junctures, when the MTRC can accommodate, we will extend the CC3 to the police district of the MTRC police district. So apart from the airport, the secretary says that the system will be extended to the CC3. Does it mean that other than the MTRC, other districts have all been covered? Mr. Secretary, Mr. President, in fact, the airport district is covered by CC3. In our second extension, now, in fact, we are extending it in phase. The first phase was successful. Now, the police officers at the airport are using CC3, but in CC3, there are different systems. The member asks whether other police districts have not adopted CC3. Now, the airport has adopted it. As for the MTRC, I've already explained that others are using CC3. Mr. Leung Shing. Now, it is said that the police said that the system will not harm any human health. But it was also said that people doubt about this statement. I want to ask the Secretary whether the system... Mr. Ng, are you asking... What question? Which question are you asking? It is about this system. What system? What device? It's about the communication system used by police officers. It is said that the police officers using the system, their health may be harmed. Now, the police has reiterated that it will not be harmful to the police officers using the system, but some people do have doubts about it. I want to know whether the police will provide any guarantee that it will not harm the health of the users. The Secretary, with regard to system design and procurement, its quality and safety standards are in line with the requirement of the police force, and we have not received any issue raised by police officers claiming that their health have been harmed because of using the system. We've spent more than 22 minutes.
Last question, Mr. LEE Cheuk-yan. Thank you, President. It has been reported that Cathay Pacific Airways, or CX, is preparing to launch a cross-based flying scheme, or the new scheme, under which flight attendants based in Singapore, Bangkok, and San Francisco are allowed to swap the routes they serve. For example, under the new scheme, Bangkok-based crew may work on flights between Hong Kong and San Francisco. It has been learned that CX has all along recruited expatriates from abroad to serve as Hong Kong-based flight attendants and work on flights traveling to and from Hong Kong, but these employees are required to obtain work visas from the Hong Kong government and reside in Hong Kong, and they are also entitled to housing allowances. Some CX employees have pointed out that the arrangement made by CX for non-Hong Kong-based crew to work on flights traveling to and from Hong Kong is tantamount to shifting local posts to overseas cities where staff costs are lower. In this connection, will the government inform this Council, A, whether non-Hong Kong-based CX employees are required to obtain work visas from the Hong Kong government for working on flights which stop over in Hong Kong, if not, of the reasons for that? B, of any requirement in the regulations for the aviation industry that local airlines licensed by the Air Transport Licensing Authority should accord priority to local workers in filling the posts created by them. And 3, whether it will take any measures to prevent locally registered airlines from employing non-Hong Kong-based employees to work on flights within Hong Kong or with Hong Kong as the operation center so as to protect local workers' employment opportunities. Secretary for Labour and Welfare. Secretary for Transport and Housing. President, in response to Mr. Lee's question, we have gathered information from CX about this cabin crew cross-based flying initiative, or the new initiative. According to the information provided by CX, the airline has established 7 outport bases in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Vancouver, Toronto, London, Singapore, and Bangkok, respectively, to serve the routes between Hong Kong and these destinations. At present, CX has employed about 950 outport-based crew, which is about 10.4% of its total crew. The new initiative mentioned in the question only involves 3 outport bases, namely San Francisco, Singapore, and Bangkok, and will last for 1 to 3 months. The new initiatives will be launched as a trial on a voluntary basis to roster those volunteer crew from San Francisco on the Singapore and Bangkok flights, and volunteer crew from Singapore and Bangkok could also serve on San Francisco flights. CX will gauge the feedback from participating outport-based crew and review the result of the new initiative in order to decide if the new initiative will be applied to other outport bases. According to CX, the new initiative will only involve a swap of duties of relevant participating outport-based crew on the destinations originally served by them. Neither the total number of flights served by the outport-based crew nor the number of local crew serving these flights and their respective flight hours will be affected. The new initiative, therefore, does not involve creation of new posts or outsource of local jobs to overseas. The flying arrangements, salaries, allowances, and promotions of local crew, etc., will not be affected by the new initiative. In response to Mr. Lee's question, my reply is as follows. A. In accordance with Annex 9 to the Convention on International Aviation, i.e. facilitation of international air transport by means of simplified procedures, all contracting parties are obliged to allow entrance of the operating flight crew members without visas if they can present the relevant documentation. The obligation applies to Hong Kong. According to Section 9(1) of the Immigration Ordinance, Cap 115, where a person who does not enjoy the right of abode or right to land in Hong Kong arrives in Hong Kong as a member of the crew of an aircraft under an engagement requiring him or her to leave within 7 days on that or another aircraft as a member of its crew, then he or she may land in Hong Kong without the permission of an immigration officer or immigration assistant and remain until the departure of the aircraft on which he or she is required by his or her engagement to leave. Crew members employed by airlines may enter and remain in Hong Kong for at most 7 days according to the above provision and need not apply to the Immigration Department for visas for employment in Hong Kong. B. Among the various rules and regulations in regulating the aviation industry, including the policies and guidance published by the International Civil Aviation Organization or the ICAO and Civil Aviation Ordinance Cap 448, there are no specific requirements that priority must be given to local employees in filling the vacancies of a local airline. According to the requirements set out in Air Transport Licensing Fare Services Regulations or Cap 448A, an aircraft registered in Hong Kong must apply for the relevant license from the licensing authority prior to its operation of scheduled journeys in relation to Hong Kong. The above-mentioned regulations have not specified that the operator should accord priority to local residents to fill the vacancies in relation to the provision of the relevant services. In addition, Civil Aviation Department will issue air operating certificates to airlines in accordance with relevant local aviation regulations and the standards and guidance as stipulated by Annex 6 to the International Civil Aviation Convention. The relevant civil aviation regulations, international standards, and guidance have specific requirements in respect of the technical skills, professional ability, and physique of the flight crew to ensure aviation safety. The nationality or origin of the crew is not a factor for consideration. C. To maintain its competitiveness and provide safe and appropriate services to the traveling public, an airline will take into consideration its operating needs, customer requirements, and business strategies when deciding its human resources policies. Given the operational needs of the aviation sector, it is an industry-wide practice to employ crew members with different nationalities. There are no indications that CX is outsourcing its local jobs to overseas. We believe airlines will strike a balance between operational efficiency, legal compliance, service quality, and staff requirements when making plans on resources deployment. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, President. Mr. LEE Cheuk-yan, from the reply by the Secretary, we can see that the administration has been colluding with the business sector and it is favoring the large consortium. It has never been concerned about the regulations on hiring local crew or local employees, and they just trust what CX said. I think, well, for Bangkok crew, all right, they are rare crew, and their hourly wage would be about 1/5 lower than that for their Hong Kong counterparts. So it's 1/5 lower. And if they can fly to San Francisco, then how can it not affect Hong Kong's air crew or employees? This is a very simple logic. It's a zero-sum game, because if they fly more, then of course local employees will be flying less. So, Secretary, if you still choose to believe in them, then this is really quite amazing. So will you be facing up to this issue? This is with regard to giving priority to local employees. Well, in the license issued to the airlines, would there be stipulations saying that priority will have to be given to local employees so that they will have to account for the largest number of employees of the airline, or else you will not be issuing license to them, or else you'll be doing this at the expense of the local employees? Secretary, with regard to the follow-up question by Mr. Lee, I'd just like to say that with regard to the new initiative in question, it only involves outport, the redeployment or deployment of staff of the outport bases. As regards local crew and also flying local routes, they have not been affected at all. And therefore, with regard to the wages, allowances, and work hours and so on, that has not been affected at all. And also, on the basis that, well, this is the case for all airlines globally, well, in order to ensure the operational efficiency, well, they will have to recruit a crew from different nationalities, who speak different languages, and therefore this is a very common practice for the airlines to recruit staff worldwide, and therefore they will have to look at their own operational needs, because they do have customers from different places, and therefore they have their own business strategy, and they will have to come up with appropriate human resource plan in order to maintain their competitiveness. And they will also have to maintain the confidence of the public in them, and also the quality of service. I think this is the practice worldwide, and therefore we believe that there is no need for us to impose a rigid requirement for them to recruit local employees, and that they will have to meet a certain ratio. Mr. Lee, I think my question has not been answered. That is, will he be imposing a ratio? I'm not saying that the airlines will have to employ only local staff. But then I'm asking if it's possible to introduce a quota or a ratio, or else how can you say that you're very concerned about the interests of local workers? I think the Secretary was answering your question on the question of ratio. Secretary, do you have anything to add? President, in fact, I've already answered that question, but then let me supplement briefly. Well, with regard to crew working at outport bases, well, out of the 9,000 plus air crew, they were only accounting for about 10% of the total crew. And even in the past, during the past 10 years or so, with regard to expatriate staff and also outport crew and also local crew, if you look at the ratio, basically absolute majority is local crew. As regards outport base, they've only got about 1,300 plus outport crew, and therefore, all in all, I do not see that there is a trend for them to expand the ratio of outport crew or overseas crew. Mr. Peter Chung, looking at point 2 in the main reply, it says that there is no requirement for local airlines to give priority to local employees when they recruit staff. All in all, they can even give priority to non-local workers, right? So it's a question of local employees and non-local employees. If they are fighting for the same jobs and also work hours. In fact, what CX is now doing is that they are using non-Hong Kong based crew, and in doing so, they are actually exploiting the opportunities for local workers. So I'd like to put this to the Secretary for Labour and Welfare. As the Secretary for Labour, how are you going to ensure that local workers' employment opportunities will not suffer, so that these jobs will not be taken up by non-local workers? Secretary for Labour and Welfare, well, as Mr. Yao has already made it very clear, that is, this is just a pilot program of an airline, and it has not affected the number of jobs locally. So there is no question of increasing or reducing the number. In fact, it's just a redeployment of staff from outport bases. And of course, if they want to import air attendants and so on, there would be very strict requirements. But then under the supplementary import of labor program, in fact, these airlines have never submitted any application for import of labor. So please rest assured that is not going to happen. But then I'd just like to know that even under the pilot program, that is also depriving the job opportunities of local workers. So I'd like to ask Mr. Cheung how he can protect the interests of local workers. As I've already made it very clear, and I think Mr. Yao has already explained it. So it's about redeployment of staff from outport bases. It has nothing to do with local crew, and therefore this is not the case. Sorry, Mr. Cheung, I think the Secretary has already answered your question, and if you want to have a debate with him, then you will have to do so at another forum. Yes, Mr. Yu Si-wing. President, I'd like to know, well, CX is now going to launch this cross-base flying scheme. I'd like to know if other airlines have done similar things or introduced similar programs. If so, if yes, then Hong Kong as an international cosmopolitan city, if we just impose administrative measures to prevent this from taking place, will that affect Hong Kong's reputation as an international cosmopolitan city? And does that mean that other airlines might be doing the same, so that if they prevent or if they try to restrict the number of Hong Kong air crew, then will that happen? Well, internationally, airlines will have flexibility in deploying their crew, and that is a common practice. For example, in the UK, in Japan, in South Korea, well, they do allow outport crews to take part in routes other than the local routes, and such arrangement would give a greater flexibility, much greater than that being adopted by CX under its new initiative. And therefore, with regard to CX new initiative, it just allows outport crew to be redeployed amongst the different routes. But then with regard to local staff and also their work hours and their salaries, there is no impact whatsoever. Mr. Leung Kwok-him. Thank you, President. All right, this government has always favored outsiders. Well, for vessels coming into Hong Kong, well, worldwide, they're required to use clean fuel, but then in Hong Kong, they are allowed to use dirty fuel. Well, this is really outrageous in terms of our navigational maritime policy. All right, setting that aside, coming back to this point, all right, the two bureau directors, people have told you that they are aware of the CAD's requirements, and they are also aware that this requirement could be abused. And in the past, that has not been abused. But now, under the so-called pilot program, well, for people that are paid just 1/5 of the local staff, and they are also able to do the jobs of Hong Kong staff. And you say that that will not change the ratio. Of course, they have not done it yet, but then once it's implemented, it's going to affect local workers' interests. So my question for you is: have you asked CX whether or not such pilot program will not be expanded? And number two, how are you going to ensure that the ratio will not change? So can you answer these two questions? So is it that CX has already told you? Well, I'd like to quote this, because this morning I received this newsletter from CX asking me for my feedback. Mr. Leung, you are not supposed to express your personal opinions. Well, they said that they would be cutting costs. So please sit down and allow the two bureau directors to answer your question, all right? Which secretary? Secretary for Transport and Housing. Well, President, as I said in my main reply, on this occasion, under the pilot scheme, that would be tried in 3 outport bases, and of course, after the trial, they will be collecting the feedback from the crew from these outport bases, and of course, they will then consider whether or not the program should be extended. As regards members concerned that this might affect local crews' employment opportunities and also their remuneration and so on. But then, according to our understanding, if CX were to use outport crews to replace local crew, we do not see this happening. Why do I say this? That's because if you look at their recruitment program next year, they have told us that they are going to recruit 570 crew members next year, and out of the 570 crew members, over 500 would be from Hong Kong. In other words, they are still intending to recruit more local staff than overseas staff. I think my question has not been answered. Can you repeat that? Well, the first question that I put to him was to what extent will this program be expanded? And he has not answered this question. CX has not told them. And if they are going to expand the program, how are they going to maintain the existing ratio? And they said that he said that they would be recruiting 570 people, but then 500 would be from Hong Kong. But then it's a waste of time by giving us that sort of answer. All right, please sit down and allow the secretary to answer. All right, will the program be expanded? And after the expansion, how would that ratio be kept? Well, as I said, at present there are 7 outport bases, and under the program, that would only be done in 3 outport bases, and afterwards they will be collecting the feedback from their staff to see if it's effective, and then they'll decide whether or not that should be extended to other outport bases. But then, once again, I'd like to stress that for such redeployment, well, it's just between the outport base or the outport crew. It has nothing to do with local staff. Mr. Leung, how can he answer that way? I think the secretary has already answered your question. So you mean he has been sincere and honest? All right, please sit down. Mr. Leung Yu-chung. President, well, even though the 2 bureau directors have emphasized time and again that the pilot program will not affect the existing, the local crew, the flying hours, and so on. And the Secretary also emphasized that the new program would not affect the creation of new posts, and there is no question that the initiative will be creating new jobs. But then have you taken this up further with CX? Well, what's the point in implementing this initiative then? Because you've been saying that they would have to gauge the feedback from the staff. But then what kind of opinions are they going to are they going to take from the staff? Is it that the working environment has improved? Or is it that after the redeployment, well, in fact, they will still be able to cope and there is no need for them to increase the number of staff, and still they will be able to cope? And that will also mean that there will be less chance of creating more jobs. Is that right? So can the Secretary give us more details? So according to your understanding, have you put that to CX? That is under the new initiative. What is the ultimate objective? What is the purpose of introducing this initiative in the first place? Secretary for Transport and Housing. President, on this issue, we have actually tried to understand more from the airline. According to our understanding, the original purpose of introducing this program, well, the suggestion was from these outport crew, because if they have to fly from Singapore or Bangkok to Hong Kong, and if they've been flying on such routes, then to them, they feel that, well, during the journeys and also during their career, there would be very little change. And therefore, they propose that if they can be or if they can swap routes with other crew from other destinations, and that would mean that, well, their horizon can be widened and their career would also be more meaningful. And therefore, in the light of this, CX just try this out to see if this is a good move. And also, I'd like to supplement on another point. That is, many of these outport crew are from Hong Kong, but then the thing is they have lived overseas, and therefore they might have been recruited elsewhere. But then for these crew members, if they have more flexibility in their duties, then that would also be good to their staff. Yes? Dr. Kenneth Chen. Thank you, President. Looking at the reply by the Secretary, apparently he's speaking as if he's the spokesman of the airline. He says that it's okay, but then he just needs to take into account various needs and so on, and there is nothing further to report. But then in raising this question in this council, of course, we'd like to know whether or not the administration will be concerned or even take follow-up action, and under what circumstances will you be taking an appropriately proactive approach on this matter. So apparently the Secretary has every confidence in CX, but then CX has also said that if this initiative is successful, then the program will be expanded. And also in 2012, I'd like to supply this information to the Secretary. All right, with regard to local staff, there will be an increase by 5%, but then for outport crew, there was an increase by 15%. There was an increase by 15%. So I'd like to know, in following up on this, will you take further action, and also what follow-up action will be taken? Secretary. President, of course, we try to seek information from CX, and we will have to see if that would be in line with their operational needs. Have they done anything that might have exceeded the regulations or requirements? With regard to the growth in the staff contingent, as I've said, during the past 10 years or so, on average, every year, they would recruit about 100 or so staff members. That has been rather steady, and there has not been any serious fluctuation during the past 10 years or so. Well, for outport basis, yes, they have got about 1,100, but then even now, they've only got 900 plus outport-based crew. We have already spent over 23 minutes on this. And that's all for our oral questions today.
議案
Motions. Proposed resolution under the Criminal Procedure Ordinance.